did recover alien bodies. They didn't tell me about it either, and I want to know.
Is it possible for the military to keep secrets about UFOs from the president?
There's always things like that going on. Flying saucers, and they've had other things, you know.
What does the commander-in-chief really know about extraterrestrials?
We were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
How many times has the United States defended itself from UFOs? Since World War II, every chief executive has tackled the national security threat posed by unidentified flying objects. Discover the evidence behind these presidential predicaments as we open the UFO files on UFOs and the White House. It's the early morning hours of February 25th, 1942, just 2 months after the attack on Pearl Harbor. All is quiet at the White House while President Franklin Delano Roosevelt sleeps. But 3,000 miles away, the west coast border of the United States is encroached by an enemy, an unidentified flying enemy. Chaos erupts with a blip on a radar screen.
A sequence of events may have involved the alarm or the report coming through to the radio operator notifying the duty sergeant.
Alert, alert, this is not a drill, this is not a drill, alert, alert.
Then the duty sergeant sounding the alarm or ordering the alarm sounded. From that point on, it would have been somewhat pandemonium at the beginning, of course, the initial shock, but then, of course, the troops are very professional and immediately went to their task and went to the assigned positions. The people operating the searchlights would have manned the lights, people operating the guns, manned the guns, ready to take on the enemy.
Hit the ground, hit the ground!
Within minutes, the dark Southern California coast is rippled with beams of light and streaks of anti-aircraft fire.
Fire! Fire, fire, fire! Fire!
Perhaps a conservative estimate is maybe about 2,000 rounds fired that night, which would have been a very loud night for a town used to peacetime.
But as defenses come to play, confusion reigns, but no one seems to know exactly where the enemy is.
Well, that's the big mystery, and it's still a mystery today. You talk to many veterans, and they will swear to you that they saw aircraft that night. You will talk to many officers who will tell you there was nothing in the air that night. You will talk to civilians who saw aircraft that night. So it's really somewhat of a mystery still. The Army officially concluded that there probably were airplanes up there, but there's no information as to whether they were U.S. or Japanese or whose they were. By definition, I think a UFO. Now, if you want me to say it's little green men, I'm not prepared to commit to that, but yes, it was an unidentified flying object, I think is fair to say.
For nearly an hour, the ballistic barrage peppers the skies. But as day breaks, it becomes apparent that the only damage caused by the soldiers is to the city of Los Angeles.
Everything that goes up must come down, and of course the surrounding areas were littered with shrapnel fragments. So flak was raining down, and in some cases live shells actually came down and detonated. Of course, the media responded, as media does much of the time, with, let's sell some newspapers. So perhaps the stories were exaggerated, perhaps not.
In fact, one of the stories was going around about the LA thing was that the Japanese had submarines and that they were launching planes off of submarines, which makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. If you take eyewitness reports, they said it was hovering, not just going slow, it was hovering. They have the one photograph where this thing has all the lights focused on it and basically doesn't look like any type of plane that was available at that time.
Accounts of citywide wreckage are explained to President Roosevelt in Washington. The task falls to General George C. Marshall, the War Department's Chief of Staff.
Well, Marshall's letter is probably one of the most curious documents to ever be issued about the event. It says as many as 15 airplanes may have been there, varying at speeds from very slow to immediately increasing to 200 miles per hour, ranging from altitude from 9,000 to 18,000 feet. And again, no bombs were dropped, no casualties inflicted, no Allied or U.S. Navy or Army airplanes in the air that night. It just doesn't seem to make sense. If the Japanese had come all this way, we would have thought that there would have at least been some bombing, and certainly if there was more than one aircraft.
Nobody can say for sure how FDR first reacted to word that his military responded to what some claim to have been an unidentified flying object.
The only thing that came back from the president was a memo from him to Stimson, who was the Secretary of War.
The president sent a curt message to Harry Stimson, demanding to know who was responsible for the air alarm systems in the United States, and if anyone other than authorized officials could have triggered them. How Stimson replied to FDR and how he explained the unidentified enemy remains a mystery. No records of his response were found in the National Archives or FDR's presidential library.
At that time, I don't think they saw it as an extraterrestrial phenomenon. And I believe in 1942 it would have been a curiosity type item.
The Axis powers will control the continents.
I think President Roosevelt was so caught up with the war effort and his failing health that UFOs didn't rank high in his list of concerns.
July 1947. New threats of war and a new enemy, the Soviet Union,
That false philosophy is communism.
has Americans looking to the sky. Some say they see UFOs. President Harry S. Truman is informed of a possible incident in New Mexico.
Suddenly Roswell occurs, they have a press leak, it started getting picked up all over the country. I see him as the first president to actually deal with the UFO issue in a public sense.
And Truman was the man on the spot when this stuff hit big time. Truman is an absolute critical key in looking at the entire UFO phenomenon in the early years. We know that these presidents were being briefed orally, if nothing else, on the topic of flying saucers. Now, this is not something that you're going to read in Harry Truman's memoirs, and it's not something that you're going to read about in an academic treatment of the Truman administration, and yet we know absolutely that it happened. How do we know this? We know it from the man who gave Truman his briefings, and that was General Robert Landry, who was a colonel at the time in the Air Force.
President Truman rewarded Landry, his personal pilot, for his exemplary service by appointing him as his Air Force aide on UFOs to consult with the CIA on the subject.
And that he was told to report to the president orally and brief him orally every 3 months on the subject in UFOs, which he said he did up until the president left office.
By my estimation, that could be as many as 18 briefings. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall of some of those conversations?
It's done orally. We don't want records. If you don't want it on the front page of the New York Times, don't put it in a file, that kind of idea.
But an incident said to have occurred in the nation's capital was impossible to ignore.
1952 is just, again, one of these very significant years in UFO history. A massive wave of very high-quality sightings by military and civilians all across the U.S., culminating in